Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Kane. Kane is a really good character, but you know what isn't? Mom's Food Dailies, and this is another one of those which really relies on variance and luck more than anything else in order to get farther to the goal. And obviously every time you have a Mom's Food Daily or just any daily that doesn't go to the end, you need to find ways in order to get forward, because that is really gonna give you a lot of points. And in this particular case, it did turn out to be one of those variance-induced, if that's the right word, dailies, which really doesn't have a guarantee of going forward. And the main problem is you get a room bag, which is obviously a good idea because you can get AWAS rooms from that, but the problem is you don't get it naturally. You have to use a reroll machine and to reroll an item in order to get it, which means that already it's not gonna appear for everybody, and that's already a problem. But because of how reroll machines work, and essentially depending on which items you see on the floor prior to that, depending on which active items you pick up, you can actually get different rerolls when you use the machine and reroll that initial item. So that means that not everybody is gonna find a room bag. I would imagine most people would, just because at that point you have enough bombs, and usually you would go to the treasure room first, of course. But I do imagine that some people wouldn't, because maybe they go a different route, maybe they use a pill which teleports them somewhere or whatever. And obviously all of that does play into that narrative of variance-induced dailies. But obviously besides that, there's another problem. Even if you do get a room bag, depending on which point you get it at, so if you get it at the start of the floor or maybe at the end of the floor, it can really end up making a difference on depending on which rooms you get. Just because you get that extra 10 or maybe 12 rooms of exploration, depending on where you find it, of course, you're gonna get different runes at the start, and if an AWAS rune isn't gonna naturally show up in those some extra places or extra rooms you're gonna visit, then maybe you're not gonna find an AWAS rune at all, and someone else might have. And obviously all of that again just plays into that narrative of variance in those dailies, which is not really exciting. But I did find an AWAS rune. I do have some tips and tricks on how you can maybe maximize your chances in order to get farther, or at least as far as you possibly can. But this daily really did show that when you're playing from behind, or at least when you're playing from a point where you feel like other players are doing better, there are some things that you can do in order to maybe maximize your chances of getting a good rank. As always, I don't really play to get the best rank. I'm not playing for the top 3 spot. Sometimes I do, but in the most cases I'm just trying to get as good of a score as possible. And sometimes that does require to make a little bit of sacrifices at some point. And because I don't check the leaderboards prior to playing the dailies, that just means I'm kinda going in blind, and I have to make every decision kind of statistically. I have to wager my options and kind of look at which option is gonna give me the most points in the average case scenario. And I feel like that's a good approach to playing the dailies in general, because I feel like that teaches you some form of playing it in the optimal way, and every time you have a decision to make, you can kind of fall back on that and have an objective reasoning as to why you make the decision. And I do enjoy that style of play. I do understand that maybe it's not for everybody, but I think this is a perfect example, or this daily is a perfect example of just showcasing that methodology, or at least what my thought process is when I'm playing in a situation where I feel like I'm playing badly, or maybe I'm falling behind or whatever. Because this was a daily where you find Guppy's tail rather early on and another Guppy later on as well. I just figured this is gonna be something that maybe some people found an extra red chest somewhere, or maybe they went to a boss trap room that they didn't, maybe they use a Yara rune to duplicate a red chest or whatever, and they might find a Guppy that I wouldn't find and get that Guppy transformation. Obviously that is just gonna give you so much offensive power, there's really no problem in getting to any objective. But you can see that I'm kinda struggling here. I only have 1 red health, I'm not really on pace for boss rush. Even though I have the Emperor card in this situation, I'm not really willing to use it, because if I teleport to the boss, and even if I get a devil deal here, it's not really gonna help me unless a devil deal is gonna give me some spirit hearts or health overall, and my prospects or odds of getting that are not that high. 18% chance for getting a devil deal, and then that devil deal has to contain an item, which is actually gonna give me points, and if it's Krampus, I can pretty much kiss my run goodbye. So I'm just really not in the mood to rush and try to get as much points as possible at this point. I'm just trying to survive. And whenever you have a daily where you're just trying to survive instead of trying to get the highest score possible, you know that you're not having a good time. And I feel like this is entirely my fault. I had much more health prior to that, and coming into this floor, I did try to use my sacrificial knife a bit more offensively, and the problem is that there were a lot of enemy variations or rooms which kind of bounced around into my knives. They exploded and ended up damaging me, so I was just left in an unfortunate situation of only having 1 red health. Playing to survive, it was kind of hairy at a few points here and there, especially when I was fighting the little mess of infamy That was kind of fortunate, but I did get through it, I did get here, and now at least I have more health. Of course, this was at the cost of losing boss rush, so it's not like I made some grand plays. I'd imagine a lot of people would make it to boss rush, especially with the Emperor card. There's basically no reason not to. And you would use the Emperor card on something like the Caves 1 floor, you would go to the boss immediately, and then you would lose or use the rest of the time in order to get to boss rush. And of course, when you get another teleport card, you could use that to get out, and in this case, this is exactly what happens. You get another stars card. So in this particular case, it was one of those dailies where stars lined up for people, but because I played badly, I would imagine that a lot of other players would actually get to boss rush. So I kind of had to make some amends. So first of all, I knew I was behind from this point already. I got hit way too many times. I didn't make it to boss rush, so I just felt like my ranking is tanking, and I need to find a way to kind of maximize my score. So that is, of course, just taking as much time as possible in order to play the blood banks, to try to get as many points as possible, and luckily on this particular floor, I do get the Polaroid, which is why I went to the boss fight. I tried to check the Devil Deal if it maybe had a shovel or something like that, and then what I do is just go play the blood bank as much as possible, go through the rest of the floor, and essentially try to get as many coins and points as possible. I did get something like 300 points. I was also trying to play the Fortune Teller at the same time in hopes of maybe getting a card which would enable me to maybe get something good, something like another Temperance card or maybe the Judgment card, and maybe I could reroll that later on. But I forgot that I had 2 AWAS runes, and I would like to use one AWAS rune obviously to get a floor further, and then I want to use another AWAS rune on the next floor. And this is where my first tip comes in. So if you enter a floor with an AWAS rune, like for example Womb 1, don't use it immediately, because if you have rune bag, there's a good chance you're gonna get a blank card, maybe you're gonna get a Yara rune, and you never know if that one AWAS rune that you're trying to use is gonna turn out to be a crawl space, and that isn't gonna allow you to go forward, obviously. So just wait until the end of the floor, explore everything, and at the end start using the Yara runes and the blank runes in the same room as your AWAS rune, and just hope that maybe it duplicates it, and when that happens, what can end up happening, of course, you can use one AWAS rune. If it does turn out to be a crawl space, then you can use another to get further, or maybe even better, you use an AWAS rune, it turns out to be a passage to the next floor, and then you keep the other AWAS rune in order to get further. In this particular case, this is exactly what happened. I used this strategy, so to say, on the Depths 2 on the Mount floor. I did get 2 AWAS runes, and I was saving it until the end. So I still had another AWAS rune to go through, and I used it to get to Womb 2. But this is where a very crucial decision happened. So I had 1 AWAS rune, I didn't get another one, I didn't get a Yara rune, which is obviously not something what I was planning to do, but there was a sacrifice room on the floor, and I had plenty of hearts in order to play it. So what should I do in this situation? Because I don't have a guaranteed way of getting to Shoal, and my personal rule of thumb is if there are 2 more floors of exploration, or at least 2 more floors, you should take the sacrifice room on the current floor, because there's no guarantee that the sacrifice room is gonna appear on the next floor. But in this particular case, I felt like maybe I should wager my chances. I know I was behind from just missing boss rush, and I know my ranking is tanking, or at least I presumed so. So what I felt like I had to do is, in order to get as many points as possible, I would have to take a little bit of a risk. So I would either hope that there was a sacrifice room on Womb 2, or I would hope to get another AWAS room which would allow me to go to Shoal. And luckily that's exactly what happened. And my idea here is, like I said, basically just that. I had a bad score, I had a bad run, I didn't get to boss rush, which means that I'm like 4,000 points behind. So I need a way to make up those points, and I need to beat or at least get ahead of the players which made the more sound decision and actually did get to boss rush in time. So the way to do it is to try to get another floor exploration, try to get more consumables, or maybe even get lucky and get another AWAS rune, go to Shoal and maybe get a sacrifice room there. And that's exactly what happened. And we got to, in the Womb 2, we got an AWAS rune, which allowed me to go from Womb 1, and then, because I didn't take the sacrifice room, another sacrifice room appeared here. I'm not trying to say that because I didn't take the sacrifice room, another sacrifice room appeared here. I'm just trying to say that because I didn't take that initial sacrifice room, I was very glad that another sacrifice room appeared here, because essentially this is the best way to maximize your score in terms of just getting as far as possible. And I was really wagering my chances, and this does go in tandem with my philosophy of not using a sacrifice room unless you only have 1 floor remaining in front of you, because there was always a chance for me to go to another floor of Shoal, and if there was a sacrifice room of Womb 2, I would have definitely used it, just because I feel like that would be the right way to do. But because there wasn't, and I was lucky enough to get an Awa's rune, then I was able to get to the shoal and then of course to the dark room. So now in this situation, we got another guppy item, so we have 3 guppy items, we have succubus, we have some damage upgrades, and most importantly, we have the holy mantle and the Polaroid. So, not the Polaroid, well, also the Polaroid, but also the Book of Shadows. So we're now in a position where we really can't afford to take any more damage, because we've already done enough of that, but we also have a lot of invulnerability, and that does allow us to be kind of safe from damage, and that does allow us to have or reduce our damage penalty even further. So I felt like we were in a good position. With Guppy, of course, I can just run into enemies and just deal damage with knives while shooting them, and the flies will take care of the rest. So a very interesting run, a very methodological run in some sense. It did allow us to kind of exploit some of the particulars of Isaac, but it also did allow us to showcase this maybe my approach to the game. And I feel like that's very important for people watching, because I do imagine a lot of people, or at least a lot of you watch because you want to maybe see some insight into how I'll play, or maybe how my dailies go, and this is it. I would say that you shouldn't be afraid of screwing up, because everybody does at some point in their lives. You can obviously just quit the run, Alt F4, and it's not really gonna count for your Greedbot leaderboards, or at least your overall ranking, but I don't like to do that. I just like to kind of maybe change my strategy depending on how well it goes, and I feel like this was the perfect example of that. How to play from behind, this is obviously just one of those things that you really can't explain, because every run is different and every run is very dependent on which items you have. It depends on maybe which floors you go, if you have to go to the Void, if you want to go to Harsh or whatever, but I feel like for this particular case it did showcase a nice example, and I hope that maybe you learned something from that. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.